Hello, my name is Kate Taylor and I'm the Landscape Coordinator for the Dawson Catchment Coordinating Association. We have recently completed several on-ground projects for 2023-24, working with various landholders across the Dawson Catchment. These projects have focused on increasing ground cover and plant diversity, enhancing soil water infiltration and improving soil health at their project sites. This is part 2 of Glen Landsberg's presentation with David and Meredith Barrett on their property in Mount Ox in Theodore, January 2024. Thank you for tuning in today.
Surveying, often get asked about this. There are lots of things that you can do that don't even need surveying. But if you're going to start getting a little bit more serious, then it does pay to get out a laser, and you can do a lot of it yourself. We've just had to modify and develop techniques that we can do it really quickly and on scale to keep it economical. But if you're doing it yourself, there are lots of people walking around with a hand staff marking in contours. So a lot of our work is on the contour. I very rarely put much fall in it, unless I'm trying to get a bit of water away from a road or a fence, and then I'll level out where I want to start irrigating or putting that water to work, so it takes the velocity out of the water. And this is just a vehicle here, just an old Toyota setup. It's what we're using, one of the things we're using, but it's got a receiver on the front of it, and we've just got a ripper on the back. That one's a little bit fancier. It's a hydraulic one, but it's my son just showing off, actually. It's a bit of flat country, and he's scooting along in second gear, and it just made for a pretty little picture of the dust cloud he was making. But a lot of it's just it's still first gear, but we're going along fairly quickly and marking country out. We use quads a lot, particularly in longer grass. This quad's got a ripper on the back of it as well. If it's open, bare ground, the rippers work well. But in long grass, we're going along with tape. But that's the little receiver that's on the front, and it just tells us our heights as we're going. But as I said, you can just use a hand staff. If you're just doing roads and fences, it's just simply being aware that if we don't get in and do something, quite often they just start to cut deeper and deeper. The water running down those things, they just need a little woo boy. You've all seen different things you can do, but just the importance of making sure you do something. A great thing that David and Meredith do that I hadn't seen before out in this western area was their roads. They mostly just slash them, and so they don't get that same amount of running water down and causing damage. This was a simple one that this bank here. We did it one afternoon and just happened to have 2-inch rainfall overnight. We went back to have a look. Now, it often comes back to what machinery is available, and these guys only had a dozer, like it was it was actually a D9, that one, but it doesn't have to be that big, D6, whatever. All I've got on my little research block is a Fergie tractor with a 3-point linkage blade on the back, and I haven't run any water out of my paddock since February 2020, and it's just the grass soaking it in now. But it's just the type of country I have. I'm not in an area that is high runoff. Although when my country was bare, I had 90% runoff. And this is just the next photo. In this case, we just used the bull tilt on the dozer to make a V drain. And then on the bottom side, when we got to where it was safe, and we wanted to start letting the water out, we just flattened it with the blade, and just so the water could just tip over and just water this country out here. This is what it often looks like on a bigger picture. You end up with a lot of chains of ponds and all of these spreader channels in between. And these are just some things that you can do. There's so many different things that don't need to get lost on any of these designs. We spent a couple of days there, and I think there probably might have been 30-odd kilometres of banks in that area there. It's up at Longreach. But this is a spreader channel here that is 6 years old. This is what I want them to look like. I want them grassed over and that you can't even see them, which can be a little bit dangerous on a bike. But this is the goal of it, is we're trying to put that water to work to get healthy landscapes and get our country productive again. So we've taken that water that's causing damage and putting it back to work. And it's looking for that opportunity, looking on your properties, where have you got water doing damage? Where can we put it back to work? Starting the journey of being rain ready. This is near Cunnamulla, and we don't have to have bare soils. We just did some work here, and it was just where water was being lost. And sometimes it's the silliest little things. And this was just an old artesian bore drain, and it was just taking the water off this big floodplain system and sending it off into another creek system. And that we know the age of when that started because those bore drains were put in over 100 years ago. So it's over 100 years since this country was getting water. In this low rainfall country, we're looking at over a year. Like, it was September 22 we did the work, and it was first rainfall to run water was November 2023. So just before, just the end of last year. So this is the first water on it, and we were just, you can see these old bore drains here, and we were just initially just flicking it out of those, just a number of banks flicking it out of that and back onto the floodplain where it should have been. Well, this was the same property just a few months later. I'm not sure, this might have been February, he sent me these photos. You wonder where the seed comes from. It's been bare for so long, and now you see all of that Mitchell grass coming back, and so much diversity, a lot of button grass, lots of fantastic grass. But how productive the country can be. And he's got 46 kilometres of that floodplain just on his property. And then it goes down, there's hundreds of kilometres on other people's places after that. So it becomes community programs, community projects. It's not just fixing the land on your property, it's helping people below. So for David and Meredith, by their slowing their water flow off down, people below them, it's easier for them to start fixing their erosion, fixing their systems, because the water's coming down slower to them. It's not coming down in that big peak and doing as much damage. That's just a video of that bloke flying down the chopper, but it takes a while to fly 46 kilometres. But it's pretty spectacular, the amount of water. It's mind-blowing, the amount of water that's being lost. Another thing that we do a lot of is timber banks, beaver dams, wherever there's timber that's dead timber or timber going to waste, dead trees. Yeah, the beavers in Europe and America, wow, they can do some pretty impressive things. But this was all country that was bare, and all we had to do was slow the flow and just give the water time to drop its silt and start to soak into soil, and suddenly, for very little cost, restoring some big areas. And timber banks are often a very safe way to do it. They're very forgiving. They let a lot of water can still go through. It just slows it down. Most droughts and shortages of water are optional. That's a pretty big statement, but it's getting the water back into our soil. It's that drought resilience. Just the potential there is, I really can't emphasize that enough. So these photos here were taken on the same day during the 2019 drought, and this is in my little block. Well, this here is just outside of my block, but this is what my little block used to look like. And by getting the balance back, by getting ground cover back, even in a drought, those storms and those odd rainfall events we get in a drought, by making sure that water's working, and it's never just one thing. Management is so critical, and never letting our country get bare, and developing deep-rooted grass systems, healthy landscapes. They're rain ready, they bounce. When it does rain, they can bounce so quickly. And yet, those same rainfall events did absolutely nothing where the landscape's broken. This country here, the DPI did rainfall runoff tests. When it's bare and hard capped like that in my area, we're looking at 90% runoff. If you're in a 10-inch rainfall area, that's 1 inch to try and grow something. And that's actually a road reserve. That's no stock on that country there. Where are our opportunities? I get very excited by the potential of the water, but what gets me up early in the morning, and what I have trouble sleeping, the potential in our soils, where we can take it to, where we can take productivity to with our soils. And just what I'm seeing, there's so many landholders doing so many amazing things, and driving around seeing that so many different areas and properties, and then having the time to, when I get home, to look at the science, trying to understand the science of what is happening. And we're only scratching the surface. Our potential, I used to think that I was at 30% productivity, and then I'd find, I'd do all these things, and then I'd find the next year, I think I'm still only at 30%, and I'd do more, and next year I'm still only at 30%. The goalpost just keeps shifting, and this is, I don't know what, I think I got excited and made the mouse jump in, but we look at our soils here. This is potential. We most of these soil cuttings that we see, and this is a mate of mine, a great bloke, he's with the Southern Queensland and Northern New South Wales innovation hubs. And looking at the soil cuttings, we see these soil cuttings everywhere. And most of the ones that we see are like this here, where there's a little bit of productivity on the top. And you can see they look like mostly annual grasses, nothing very, very well established there. And they're only having an impact on that top 30 centimeters of soil at most. Their root systems are putting life into that, and they're creating 30 centimeters of living soil. But the rest of that, the other couple of meters of soil, is just dead dirt. Until we get living plants in there, that's just dead dirt. For me, that's tragically sad looking at that picture, because so much of the country is like that. But it's also an amazing opportunity, because we can turn all of that into a living soil with the right plants and the right root systems going down into it. So this is what I love, these two photos. So picking on the same one again with poor Cameron, but this is what we often don't get to see. And this is some prairie grass in America, and it's where they're putting the cutting, but then they've washed the soil away so we can actually see the sponge that's in the soil. And they've done it right beside a crop where they've got some shallow rooted, I'm not sure if it's a barley or wheat, whatever it is. And you can see the different root systems between an annual plant and a perennial plant. And this is critical on so many levels, but it's also the area that we have a lot of impact on. What we do on the surface dictates what's happening on the soil. We just don't get to see it. So we're creating this massive sponge that can hold an incredible amount of water. It can not only hold an incredible amount of water, but it's a pathway for the water to get down into the soil. So when we're looking at an erosion feature and we're looking, well, where can we put the biowash in this it's somewhere safe? Quite often, it's a lot easier to do that sort of work when there's good pasture around, because you can just divert a lot of water into a well-grassed area, and the roots of those plants will just transport that water down into the soil. Now, it's not just transporting it into the soil, but when we've got that sponge, it's holding that water in a plant available form, in a sponge that our plants can access in the dry times. So this is our drought security. It's also our flood security, but because it can absorb so much water so quickly. But this is where we store a massive amount of water in those big rainfall events to then get us through those dry periods. But if we look at the root systems on these annual plants, no sponge. It's this tiny little bit here, and these plants will be showing droughted symptoms very quickly as soon as they've used up the moisture in that top section here, whereas these guys, they'll be right for the next maybe a year. They might not be as productive, but they'll still have moisture down there. The plants will still be alive and functioning. They'll be rain ready. Yeah, so I'm still getting stuck on my soil health area here at the moment. But this is my place last year. I only had 6 inches of rain, and just looking at what's happening in our soils, and where we have bare areas on the soil, the heat damage, the temperature. Once we get over 35 degrees Celsius, a lot of the microbiology in our soils, I don't know how much people have gone into the biology of their soils, but it's a pretty exciting area. But if you have bare soils, once the temperature gets over 35 degrees Celsius or roughly there, a lot of that biology will die from the heat. Now, these two areas here, these two photos are only 20 meters apart, and it's where trees at the right density and the right types of trees can play a huge part of helping and of the productivity of our landscape. And in this case here, there's a massive nutrient cycle. Their root systems are going down extraordinary depths and accessing those nutrients in that dead dirt, in those meters of dead dirt that the grasses often can't get down to. And they're bringing that nutrient up and getting it back into the nutrient cycle in the leaf fall. And also there's a lot of nutrient, particularly phosphorus is very water soluble, and when it rains, there's a lot of phosphorus coming off the leaves, dripping off on the grass below. So we often see the grass can be a lot more productive under trees at the right density, the right trees at the right density. Now, the context there, it's looking at your own landscapes and saying, well, where have we got areas in our landscape where there are the right trees where we can see this happening, and whatever those trees are, yeah, I'm certainly really encouraging, and a lot of landholders are now, to the point, a lot of landholders are even planting the right species of trees that work well. I'm trying to get to nearly 100% canopy on my little block, but I want my trees about 30 meters apart, and I'm sort of getting the best of both worlds. And that adds to that diversity. And diversity is, if you're aware of the biology, we need at least, I think, Dr. Christine Jones talks somewhere between 8 and 12 different species of plants before your biology starts to really come into action. And certainly trees and different varieties of trees can play a huge role in that without impacting our productivity and actually improving our productivity. Plus, we also have the extraordinary amount of evaporation of bare soils. So we're looking at, at home, I'm looking at least 3 times, it might be 4 or 5 times the productivity in these areas here where I've got total ground cover compared to where I've got patchy grass with bare soil in between. The bare soil is also where you get your runoff. It sets hard and then there's runoff. So this was that same spot, the very same spot, and after 6-inch rainfall year, and then started to get some rain around Christmas, and suddenly it bounced. It was rain ready. But the country that had the total ground cover and under the trees at leaf fall, suddenly, it's creating that organic layer of our soil. And to me, that's a really critical part of that whole nutrient cycle and productivity of our landscape. We often think of that organic layer, we often hear it mentioned, and to me now, it's not some mythical nicety that I'd like to have. It's a necessity. I'm doing whatever I can to try and create that organic layer, because that's the home, that's the food and the home for all that biology. It's that nutrient cycle. It does so many things. But my productivity, where I've got to redevelop that organic layer, is just massively ahead of where I don't have it. I'm looking at ways to roll my pasture because I don't have enough herd impact, but we can do it with herd impact. It seems wasteful. A lot of people look at it and think, why are you wasting your grass? But I'm trying to lay, I've found where I lay some of my pasture down to get that full coverage on bare soils, that my productivity just lifts instantly. It's quite an extraordinary quick result. But where you've got leaf fall adding to it, you get a lot of fungal activity start to happen. You get your mycorrhizal growth, fungal growth happening, which shares nutrients between all of the plants. Okay, this is just the different soil types where it was bare between the grass and then under those trees. And that was when it was dry. But you can see in the top 10 centimeters, that's what the soil looked like. Rainfall infiltration, it then comes back to the rainfall. How are we making the most of our rainfall for productivity and for drought resilience? Now, where there was total ground cover and that good organic layer on the soil, 3 inches was disappearing in 1.5 minutes, mostly where I did this. By the time I'd stand up, it was gone. Whereas 3 inches of water or 75 millimeters on bare soil with the hard cap was still there 10 hours later. I had a camera on this, and actually most of the water just went to birds drinking it. But the reason why we're getting that infiltration is it's going into this sponge. It just can't lap it up quick enough. And which comes back to A, managing our grass, and B, we can tip a lot of water into grass like that, and it'll just soak it up. Now, I actually took that a step further, and more recently I tried, well, just how far could we go? And I went 10 inches of rain, and it infiltrated in 10 minutes, or so 250 millimeters in 10 minutes. I've never seen 250 millimeter rainfall storm in 10 minutes, and yet a healthy landscape could soak that up and store it in the soil for a dry year.
Glenn, I think that's one of the key takeaways at the event was everyone's trying to get their head around how productive that soil must be and what it must look like. David and Meredith, did you do a water infiltration test on your place? Was it at Mount Ox or Ashmount, where you got 7 inches in 3 minutes absorbed? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, Kate. It was 7 inches in 3 minutes, and we pulled up after that.
We basically ran out of water to keep tipping it in.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
And that comes back to, I forgot to mention that. Thank you for bringing that up. Because one of those early slides of that rainfall event that flooded Charleville, that was a 7-inch storm overnight in that catchment that flooded that town. And yet David and Meredith, on their land where they had that good grass cover and had this healthy soil, 7 inches disappeared in 3 minutes. If that grassy flat hadn't been an eroded gully, if it had even marginally working, 7-inch storm should have been able to soak in the ground overnight. 10 hours, it should have been able to go in the ground. And yet, because it was broken, it flooded out that town and did enormous damage to so many people. And it comes back to it being that community program, doesn't it? We've talked a bit about how by David and Meredith, by you slowing the water on your place, it then makes it safer for the people below you to do work. It's taking the damaging impact away from them. With STEP then, I suppose it's been, yes, okay. It's not advocating soil carbon projects or anything, but looking at the carbon is so incredibly important in our landscape, and it drives the productivity of our soils. And just where we've done some soil tests out here, where we've been restoring country, we've been testing inside an area of works and then testing just outside. So it's the same soil, same rainfall. It's just where we've slowed the water up by whatever means and got it back into the landscape. So the very first box here, look, it's a little bit confusing, but basically each one of these rows is a different property and a different project. So initially here, this was where someone did get an estimate done for soil carbon project, and they were looking at needing to sequester 0.8 of a tonne per hectare a year, and they were only looking at that top 30 centimetres. So that's this orange bar here, and they weren't counting the top 10 centimetres. So each of these different colours is a different layer in the soil. So this next property here was where they did a rehydration project and slowed the water down, but they weren't in a position to change the management. They still had the conventional set stocking. And with the conventional set stocking, this was all the soil carbon that they managed to sequester in a year. But it was still considerably more because they went to a greater depth, counted to a greater depth. It was considerably more than what was estimated, was the potential was. So the same thing with this one. This was another one, still had conventional stocking. This one here, we couldn't do these depths here, it was too wet. But this is the top 10 centimetres, and this is the 10 to 30 centimetres is the orange bar. And we only, the green bar here is only counting, it isn't counting the blue because we called it labile carbon, that it's more that organic layer on the top. But the point is, once we go to a property where they did the rehydration work, but they also did rotational grazing, suddenly the carbon just took off. the carbon in the soil, and remembering the carbon in the soil is what's driving the productivity. It's driving the soil moisture holding capacity of your soil. It changes really, really quickly. Now, this is my little block here, and then I've had more time to play with it and do other systems. But by focusing on that organic layer on the surface, it just took off to another extent. It just, even though it seemed wasteful, wasting grass doing it, and all I did was steal ideas from cropping people when they're using terminating cover crops and rolling them to feed the soil. And I just found as soon as I fed my soil, because a lot of my soil is very plant nutrient efficient, getting a little bit of carbon back into the system, drove the biology, and it just exploded. It just took it to another level. Looking at David and Meredith's country, in comparison to a lot of the soil cuttings, we're looking at, this was a 3 metre deep erosion feature here, and there were traces of buffel roots or grass roots down, or at least 2 metres on it. And yet this hasn't worked for quite some time. That's my hat there, just trying to give a little bit of context. We put a wall across the bottom of that just to say, right, that's it. We're going to block this off and we're going to silt it up. Just say, thou shalt not pass, this is it. And turn it into a wetland. We did some interesting testing just recently, and this is on Ashmount on David Meredith's other property near Mitchell. And this was an area that had been a bare little clay pan for 60 odd years, as far as locals remember. And when we just ponded this little area, it's not a very big area, but we still pondered it just as we're just trying as many different things as we could to see what might work for David and Meredith and give them as many different ideas that they might want to keep doing things themselves, so they could get a feel for what works and what they might like to keep experimenting with. And we did cheat with this. We did pond it just with a little grader, a little tiny grader. It's just using whatever machinery is available. You just build it to the size of whatever machinery you have. But we did flick some water off the main road. I love main roads for my property, and that's where I get my runoff from. And I also really like it when the council slash the road, because there's a lot more runoff when the grass is slashed compared to when it's long. But we were drilling down to 3 meters here, trying to see, because we found very quickly we were getting carbon going down much earlier than we had roots going down deep. And a lot of that was the water is carrying the carbon down to greater depths, which is good because it's priming the soil and starting to get it healthy. But the interesting thing here was that we had 3 meters of soil moisture here, a 3 meter soil moisture profile to grow pasture. Now, right below this, below the pond, this tiny little bank here that ponded that area, it was still relatively bare after the good summer rain they've had, not a lot on it, very patchy. When we drilled just here, so same soil, same rainfall, the first meter here was bone dry, no moisture at all. Whatever rain it's had has just run off. Now, the next 2 meters, from 1 meter to 3 meters, had moisture in it. There was actually some pretty good soil moisture in it. And it's the soil moisture from up here. We put so much moisture in the ground up here, it's traveling underground and traveling down to a creek system a little bit further down below, because we're on a bit of a slope here. And that's something that we find a lot in sloped country. If we can get the water up the top, it travels down the slope, but in the soil. We often don't have to put in big features or spreader channels or banks in sloped country. Whatever system you want to use, it really doesn't matter. But just getting the water back in up high, and you'll find that water will travel in the soil down the slope instead of traveling across the top of the soil and causing erosion. Yes, so I just went to a field day the other day, and there's a lot of oats being planted at the moment, and it's all around, no more than 6 inches high, most of what I saw, but just thousands of acres of it, conventional, just straight oats. And yes, it's going to need there'll be a lot of cattle required it'll finish a lot of cattle anyway. But at the field day that I went to, they were looking at some rehydration work and also doing multi-species. And this was the difference. Their oats are right beside all the conventional stuff, multi-species, and this was the productivity. It just staggering difference. And they've been doing this for 4 years now, no fertilizer. And all that, and it's simply because just understanding the science, and it's having the time to try and understand enough of the science to know that we can change our systems. We don't have to do it the way we've been doing it. What can we do to change? And for these guys here, they've read and they've learnt, they've been to field days, and biology in the soil. If we activate the biology in our soil with different diverse plants, then we don't need the fertilizer. Biology will make the nutrients that are in our soil plant available. Very few of our soils, or a lot of our soils, they are classed as phosphorus deficient, really badly out where I am. And yet it's plant available phosphorus deficient. But the soil itself isn't actually phosphorus deficient. There's phosphorus there, it's just not in a plant available form. So it's just, how do we make it available? What plants do we have to put in to make those different nutrients available? And this is just a beautiful example of that happening. And a lot of you would be seeing this and doing it, but I just thought it was a beautiful photo. So going forward, where are our opportunities? We need to keep learning. We need to keep looking, going around, seeing what other people are doing, keeping an open mind, constantly having an open mind to learn. There's, as far as rehydration goes, there's a lot of opportunity there. It's doing things with what you have. It's looking at where are you losing water, where can you put it back into your landscape, being aware of it. A lot of people I deal with, well, there's a whole army of them now going around with their phones, and they're looking at their phone, at satellite images on their phone, and looking for those flow lines. Where can they see erosion features? Where can they see flow lines? Where are their opportunities? But they're also looking at the land with fresh eyes. They're getting out, falling off their bike in the rain or in the mud, or getting bogged, and trying to see, where am I losing the water? Where can I put it back to work? Where is that water doing damage? What can I do? One bloke, I went to visit him, and he said, "Oh, my country's pretty flat. I don't think it'd run any water. It's very bare though. How do I get it growing something?" And I said, "Well, it's pretty hard capped. I don't know that you're getting a lot of infiltration here. There may not be a lot of fall, but I don't think you're getting a lot of infiltration." And he went back after a 2-inch storm or 50 odd millimeter storm, and just after rain, and he came back and he rang me straight away, and he was nearly in tears. He was heartbroken. He said he just could not believe it. He said all the fence lines, all the roads were just running 1.5 foot, 2 foot deep of water. He said there's no water going in. It's all just running off. And it didn't need surveying. It didn't need anything complicated. He's a contractor though. He does have some machinery. He's got some blade ploughing gear. But he just put contours across his roads, contours coming off his fence lines. And then around his paddock, he gridded it. He went around the whole edge of the paddock and with a blade plough, big square around it. And then he just did lines across on the contour. But you can do it with ripping. It doesn't matter, whatever you can do. And then he happened to have another big fall of rain after he'd done that. And he raced back out there, and he got home and he called me straight away. And he said, there's no water leaving that paddock. It is all going in the soil. So, that's what I want to pass on. Just getting people aware of their opportunities and looking to see where they can take it all forward. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Glenn. There's a lot of information to take in there, and it's great to see the pictures and the befores and afters and put it all together, and being able to get an idea of how it might work for those that will be getting in touch with you in the future. And Meredith and David, thank you so much for taking the time today to run through the recording of the presentation, and for letting us into the project that was done on farm at Mount Ox. Really appreciate.
Can I just interject there, Kate? David and Meredith, would you mind just sharing just a few words on where you were coming from with Mount Ox and what you were wanting to do?
I guess the big thing with this work is that Meredith had been nagging for about 25 years about repairing some of the historical damage. And I guess having worked with Glenn at through Southern Queensland Landscapes at the other place, we were able to see that what his stuff could work here. So basically what we're doing is we're actually repairing, but we're also rehydrating. And I think that's the big thing. It's like a double whammy. You don't just get one, you get a whole lot of things that flow from it. And I mean, you know, we've got a vision out there of having permanent water in the creek, and I mean, hopefully we'll get it back to what it was, which was a grass flat without a creek running through it. And then we've got a big gully that's up to 3 metres deep, maybe 4 metres. And if we could fill that back into what it was, and in the process rehydrate other country, then, you know, that's a huge benefit to us.
Thank you, David. Yes, it's amazing the work that you're doing, Glenn, and the work that you've done. So thank you, Meredith and David, and thank you, Glenn, for your presentation and your project and your time today.